When I saw him standing there in the kitchen, smiling like nothing had changed, I froze. Something about the way he held his coffee cup, the tilt of his head, it wasn't him, and yet it was. I could feel my heart hammering in my chest, a warning bell I couldn't ignore. I had spent 6 years married to Michael. 6 years of shared mornings, late night talks, grocery runs, and arguments over who left the lights on. And suddenly, it felt like all of that was just a carefully stitched illusion. The man in front of me, smiling, familiar, comfortable, wasn't my husband. It had started subtly, little things that didn't add up at first. The way he would misremember conversations we'd had just hours before, or the way he hesitated before answering questions about work or family. I'd brushed it off. Stress, I told myself. Long hours at the office. Maybe he was tired. But there was a coldness creeping into our home, a quiet I couldn't place, like the calm before a storm. Our mornings used to be predictable, the smell of burnt toast drifting from the kitchen, Michael humming off-key while he brewed coffee. He'd ruffle my hair before he left for work, leaving a kiss that smelled faintly of toothpaste and coffee. Those little routines made our life feel anchored, ordinary, and safe. But lately, something had shifted. The coffee tasted slightly different, his cologne a shade off, and his laughter lacked the warmth I had memorized. I remember the Tuesday when I first felt it, the gnawing suspicion. I was making breakfast, humming quietly to myself, when I noticed the way he held the butter knife. It was clumsy, almost theatrical, and I realized that he had never held it that way before. My chest tightened, but I forced a smile. "Are you feeling okay?" I asked. He laughed softly, brushing past me. "Just tired, hun. Big project at work." But the tone was off, rehearsed almost. I shook my head, trying to dismiss the thought. Maybe I was imagining things. Maybe I had spent too many nights scrolling social media, reading stories of deceit and betrayal, letting paranoia seep in. Still, the unease grew. I started paying attention to details, the way he answered calls, the slight hesitation when talking about family gatherings, the subtle changes in his wardrobe. The man who had known me so intimately now seemed to be studying me instead. It wasn't just suspicion, it was a creeping fear, like walking on ice that might crack underfoot. Our friends noticed it too. At dinner with Mark and Denise, Michael, or who I thought was Michael, laughed too loud at jokes I didn't recognize, asked questions about people I hadn't mentioned, and seemed to forget our inside jokes. Denise leaned over, whispering, "Is he okay?" I nodded, forcing a laugh, but inside, panic bubbled. Something was very wrong. Then came the phone calls, strange calls in the middle of the night. He would step into the hallway, speaking in hushed tones, his voice clipped, formal, not the warm drawl I knew. I tried to ignore it, tried to chalk it up to work stress, but every instinct I had screamed that this wasn't just a work matter. It felt bigger, darker, something calculated. I started checking things quietly, emails left open on the laptop, phone messages, bills. Small inconsistencies piled up, credit card charges I didn't recognize, appointments I hadn't been invited to, mentions of people I'd never met. It was like living with a stranger wearing my husband's skin. And the strangest part? He never did anything overtly wrong in my eyes. No yelling, no cheating that I could prove, just subtle, pervasive manipulation. I tried confronting him casually. "You've been really distracted lately. Is something going on at work?" I said one evening while folding laundry. He smiled. Oh, that smile, warm, familiar, yet somehow rehearsed. "Nothing at all, sweetheart, just busy, you know." And he brushed past me, wrapping an arm around my shoulder. It was the same gesture I had leaned into 1,000 times, yet it felt alien, like a shadow imitating sunlight. Days passed, each one heavier than the last. I started sleeping with one eye open, double-checking doors, listening to the echo of footsteps in the hall. I felt trapped in my own home, suffocated by the subtle wrongness of everything I had trusted. And then, one Thursday evening, I came home to find a letter slipped under the door. No envelope, no name, just a single sheet of paper with a few typed words that made my stomach drop. You think you know him, but you don't. I held it in trembling hands, my mind spinning. My husband? Who was he really? The thought clawed at me, relentless. And in that moment, I realized I had to find out the truth. Not later, not tomorrow, but now. The next morning, I started piecing things together, names, addresses, old photographs tucked away in drawers. And that's when I found it, the first undeniable clue that would unravel everything. A receipt in his jacket pocket dated 3 weeks ago for a hotel in a city he hadn't mentioned, and next to it, a photo of him, or rather someone who looked exactly like him, with a woman I had never seen. I remember the smell of the coffee brewing in the background, bitter and sharp, while my hands shook holding the photo. I wanted to scream, to collapse, to deny it all, but my eyes wouldn't lie. That wasn't Michael. That wasn't my life. That was someone else, someone who had taken his place. And just like that, the world I had built, our home, our memories, my trust, started to crumble. Would you like me to continue to part 2? I couldn't think straight. My hands were still clutching the photo, my chest tight with panic. I kept saying his name, Michael, over and over, as if repeating it could somehow anchor me back to reality. But every whisper of it felt wrong. My husband? Or the man pretending to be him? I didn't know anymore. I remember sitting down on the edge of our bed, the sheets still warm from the morning, and just staring at the wall. The hum of the refrigerator, the faint ticking of the clock, it all sounded unnervingly loud. My mind replayed every small change, every subtle oddity from the past weeks, the missed dates, the weird phone calls, the slightly different cologne. Everything was pointing to the same terrifying truth. Someone had been living in my house, wearing Michael's face, his life, his name. The first clue had been small, a hotel receipt, but it led me to more. I started searching through old files on his laptop, carefully, like a thief in my own home, and that's when I saw it. Messages, emails, screenshots, all pointing to someone named Daniel. Daniel, a name I had never heard in 6 years of marriage. And the photographs, they were identical. 2 men, indistinguishable, except one smiled with warmth and love, and the other, cold, calculated, smiling in a way that made my skin crawl. I felt sick, dizzy. I wanted to throw up, but instead, I just sank to the floor and let the weight of it crush me. How could I have been so blind? How could I have let someone manipulate me so completely without noticing? I needed answers, but I also needed proof. I started documenting everything, the receipts, the emails, the strange behaviors I had observed. I knew I couldn't confront him blindly. This was bigger than a simple argument or a misunderstanding. This was deception on a scale I had never imagined. And then it hit me. Daniel had been living with me for weeks. He had learned everything about my life, my routines, my finances. He could move in my house, talk to my friends, even touch the people I loved, and I would have no idea he wasn't Michael. I tried to remember when I had first noticed the tiny inconsistencies, the misplaced mug, the wrong favorite song playing on the radio, the subtle shift in how he spoke to my parents. Each memory hit me like a slap in the face. I could almost see him, Daniel, sitting there, watching me, learning me, studying me. Every smile, every comforting word, every argument. I had believed it was love, but it had been a performance. I knew I couldn't wait. That night, I decided to test him. I had to confirm my suspicion before I could plan what to do next. I set the scene carefully, making it look casual. I mentioned a memory only Michael and I shared, a trip to the lake last summer, something silly and private, a joke only the two of us knew. He froze, just for a fraction of a second, but it was enough. His eyes flicked down, his fingers tightened around his drink, and for the first time, the practiced warmth disappeared. He recovered quickly, smiled, and said, "Of course I remember. How could I forget?" But it wasn't the Michael I knew. There was a hesitation, a tiny tremor, a crack in the mask. My heart pounded. I had my confirmation. This wasn't my husband. This was Daniel, Michael's twin, a man who had somehow stepped into our lives and stolen my trust. I spent the next few days gathering more evidence. I went through bills, credit card statements, even old photographs from family events. It became clear Daniel had been orchestrating this carefully. He knew my routines, my family's routines. He even knew which friends I would confide in, which places I frequented, and which conversations I would overlook as ordinary. By this point, I was living on a knife's edge. Every time Daniel smiled at me, I felt a mix of fear and disbelief. I had loved my husband with everything in me, and now I was living with a man who had stolen his life, pretending so convincingly that even I had been fooled. The confrontation had to be perfect. I couldn't just accuse him outright without proof. I needed to see his reaction, to catch him in the moment where the mask slipped. So I invited him out to dinner, just the two of us, under the guise of celebrating a small anniversary. I wanted him relaxed, thinking everything was normal. Sitting across from him, I studied his face. The way he laughed, the way he gestured with his hands, the way his eyes flickered when I asked a simple question. Everything screamed Daniel. I felt a surge of both anger and sorrow. Anger for being deceived, sorrow for the man I truly loved and feared I might never see again. Then I spoke, carefully, testing the waters. "Michael, do you remember when we used to talk about our dream home, the one by the river?" His hand trembled slightly around the glass. He swallowed, and for a moment I saw panic in his eyes. Then he smiled, a forced, too bright smile. "Yes, of course." That was it. That was the crack I had been waiting for. I knew I had him. The rest of dinner passed in a blur, though I remember every detail as if etched in my mind. The soft hum of the restaurant, the clinking of silverware, the faint aroma of roasted garlic and melted butter. It all seemed amplified, almost unreal. I forced casual conversation, peppered with memories only Michael and I shared, carefully watching for the slightest sign of discomfort. And he wavered, just a little, each time I nudged the truth closer to the surface. When dessert arrived, a simple chocolate torte, my hands were trembling under the table. I could feel every beat of my heart, each one pounding like a drum in my ears. I had rehearsed my questions 1,000 times, but nothing could prepare me for facing a person who had so completely violated the life I thought I knew. "Michael," I said softly, my voice steady but quiet enough that only he could hear. "You've been different lately. I know something's going on. I need the truth." He froze mid-bite, chocolate smeared faintly at the corner of his mouth. For a fraction of a second, I saw panic, then an almost imperceptible smirk, the kind of smirk that tells you someone knows they're playing a dangerous game. I don't know what you mean," he said, forcing the words with a casual tone that didn't match the tension in his posture. I leaned forward slightly, lowering my voice even further. Don't lie to me. I've seen receipts, emails, pictures. You're not Michael. You're Daniel. And I know you've been living my life, my home, my trust, my family, while pretending to be him. For a moment, the restaurant felt too small, the walls pressing in. I could see the flicker of recognition in his eyes, a split second where the mask slipped. His fork dropped to the plate with a soft clink. You know? He whispered, almost afraid to say the words aloud. I do, I said firmly, and I want to know why. Why would you do this? Why would you step into someone else's life and take everything? He leaned back, his hands gripping the edge of the table, and for the first time, he looked vulnerable. Not the charming, confident man who had fooled everyone, but a real person, flawed and human. I didn't mean to hurt anyone, he said quietly. I wanted what he had, the life, the family, the love he got. I was always in his shadow, always overlooked. I thought if I became him, I could finally exist. I felt a mix of anger and something else. Pity, maybe, or disbelief. I couldn't condone what he had done, but I could see the loneliness and desperation that had driven him. You didn't just take his place, I said, my voice tight. You took mine too, my trust, my home, my life. Do you have any idea what it feels like to live with a stranger pretending to be the person you love most? He didn't answer immediately. His eyes darted to mine, searching, pleading for something. Maybe forgiveness, maybe understanding, but I couldn't give it yet, not until I had a plan. Over the next few days, I started putting the pieces together. I documented everything, every call, every receipt, every unusual behavior. I spoke with our neighbors carefully, asking about strange deliveries or visitors. I reached out to old friends, discreetly confirming details about his life. It became increasingly clear that Daniel had been living among us for weeks, learning everything he needed to manipulate our world. I also realized something terrifying. Daniel had access to our finances, small withdrawals, subtle transfers, enough to cause damage, but not enough to trigger immediate suspicion. I knew I had to act quickly before he could do more. One evening, I set a trap. I suggested we go through our finances together, pretending I wanted to catch up on bills. As I expected, he hesitated when we reached certain accounts, and his explanations were shaky, inconsistent. I recorded everything quietly on my phone, gathering the proof I needed. But the most important part of my plan was psychological. I had to make him slip up, to reveal himself in front of people who knew the real Michael. I arranged a casual dinner with Michael's parents, careful to mention memories, events, and inside jokes that only Michael could know. The night arrived, and I felt a knot in my stomach the size of a fist. The air smelled of roast chicken and rosemary, the air thick with anticipation. Daniel walked in, smiling at my parents, mimicking the warmth and charm he had perfected. But as I started asking questions only Michael could know, I saw the cracks appear, hesitation, confusion, subtle glances that gave him away. By the time dessert arrived, it was undeniable. My parents looked between us, puzzled and then shocked, as Daniel fumbled, trying to answer a question about Michael's childhood. I stayed calm, letting the tension build, letting the mask slip just enough for the truth to become unavoidable. And when he finally admitted it, in a whisper that barely reached my ears, "I'm Daniel, not Michael," the room went silent. The betrayal hit my parents like a physical blow, and I could see the weight of the deception written clearly on their faces. I felt a strange mix of triumph and sorrow. I had exposed him, yes, but the emotional cost was heavy. My trust had been shattered, my life infiltrated by someone I barely knew. And yet, there was relief, too, the kind that comes after a storm passes and the sky clears just enough for the first light to seep in. That night, as I locked the doors and checked the windows twice, I realized something important. The deception had taken a piece of me, yes, but it hadn't broken me completely. I had seen the truth, and now I had control. Not over Daniel, but over what came next. Justice, closure, and my own healing. After that night, our home felt different. Lighter, yet still heavy with tension. Daniel was gone. My parents had insisted he leave immediately once the truth came out, but the damage lingered. I couldn't shake the image of him standing in the living room, pretending to be my husband, smiling at people who thought they knew him, while I felt like I was invisible, watching everything unravel. The next morning I woke to silence, the kind of silence that makes you painfully aware of every detail, the hum of the refrigerator, the ticking clock, the faint scent of rosemary lingering from last night's dinner. Michael, or rather the real Michael, wasn't home yet, and I felt an odd mixture of relief and anxiety. Relief that the imposter was gone, anxiety because the confrontation with the real Michael still loomed. I decided to gather myself before facing him. I went through our home methodically, checking every room, every drawer. It was a strange ritual, almost like reclaiming territory. I found things out of place. Receipts, a hotel key card, even a small notebook filled with his neat handwriting, but with strange observations, calculations, and notes about me, my routines, and our friends. It made my skin crawl. Daniel had studied us like specimens in a lab, learning how to infiltrate our lives seamlessly. By the time Michael walked in, I had composed myself. The familiar sound of his keys in the lock, the soft creak of the door, the scent of his cologne, it should have brought comfort. Instead, it reminded me of everything I had lost to Daniel's deception. I stood in the living room, waiting, trying to keep my voice steady. "Hey," Michael said, stepping inside. He looked tired from work, the way he always did, but there was an edge of unease in his eyes when he noticed the expression on my face. "Michael, we need to talk," I said quietly, holding up the notebook, the receipts, and the evidence I had compiled. "About Daniel." He froze. "Daniel?" "Yes," I said, my voice calm but firm. "Your twin. The one who's been living in our house pretending to be you." His eyes widened, and he ran a hand through his hair, pacing a little. "Oh, I didn't know." "You didn't know?" I repeated sharply. "Do you know what he's done? He's stolen my trust, my home, manipulated our friends and family. Do you know how terrifying it was to realize someone had been living with me, learning my life, wearing your face?" Michael sank into the sofa, burying his face in his hands. "I had no idea. I thought I knew him, but I never imagined he could do something like this." I could see the pain in his eyes, the guilt he carried for something he hadn't done, but for which he now had to bear the consequences. And yet I had questions, too many questions, that only he could answer. "Why didn't you tell me about him, about having a twin?" I asked, my voice breaking slightly. Michael looked up, his eyes softening. "I wanted to. I've tried over the years, but our parents, they made it complicated. Daniel and I were estranged. I didn't see him for most of our adult lives. I never thought he'd come here. I never thought he'd go this far." I nodded slowly. The explanation made sense, but it didn't undo the betrayal. Daniel had come into my life pretending to be someone I trusted implicitly, and while Michael hadn't orchestrated it, he was now entangled in the aftermath. Over the next few days, Michael and I worked together to untangle Daniel's web of lies. I froze any suspicious transactions, contacted our bank, and changed all passwords. Michael reached out to his parents and mutual friends, explaining the situation, helping to reassure everyone that Daniel's actions weren't his own. It was exhausting, emotionally draining, and yet strangely cathartic. Each task felt like reclaiming a piece of my life. The anger, the fear, the disbelief, all of it slowly transformed into determination. One evening, after a long day of repairing what Daniel had disrupted, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange. The air smelled faintly of jasmine from the garden. Michael joined me, sitting quietly, giving me space. "I can't believe it's over," he said softly, sipping his coffee. "I never imagined something like this could happen in our lives." I took a deep breath. It feels like a lifetime ago, and yet I can't help thinking about how easily he could have ruined everything, how easily he fooled me, fooled everyone. Michael reached for my hand. "I know, but we got through it. And you were incredible. You saw the truth even when it was terrifying." I squeezed his hand, feeling a mixture of relief and sorrow. Relief that Daniel was gone, and sorrow for the time, trust, and peace that had been stolen. But slowly, the warmth began to return, the feeling of home, of safety, of the person I loved being real and present. The next step was confronting Daniel legally. We documented everything meticulously: the deception, the manipulation, the financial interference. Lawyers, police reports, statements from friends and family, all of it formed a solid case. I wasn't seeking vengeance. I wanted justice to ensure that Daniel couldn't hurt anyone else the way he had hurt us. It wasn't easy. There were moments of doubt, nights I cried quietly in the dark, questioning my own judgment, wondering if I'd been too harsh, too suspicious. But each morning I reminded myself of the truth. Daniel made choices. He had crossed boundaries, and now it was time for him to face the consequences. By the time the legal process concluded, Daniel was barred from contacting us or coming near our home. There was a sense of closure, though it was bittersweet. The scars remained, but the fear and uncertainty had lifted. I felt like I could finally breathe again. And in that process, I learned something important. Trust is fragile, but resilience is stronger. Pain can leave marks, but it can also teach strength, vigilance, and clarity. I had been betrayed in a way I never thought possible, yet I survived, and I emerged more aware, more grounded, and more determined to protect the life I had built. The first time I saw Daniel after the legal proceedings, it was in court. He looked smaller somehow, diminished, not just by the weight of the law, but by the truth finally catching up with him. The confident, charming man who had walked into my home and stolen my life had been stripped of his mask. There was no smiling, no rehearsed gestures, only the hollow reflection of someone who had gambled with the wrong life and lost. Sitting there in the courtroom, I felt a strange mix of emotions: vindication, relief, lingering anger, and an almost imperceptible sadness. I remembered the nights I had cried quietly, the mornings I had woken with a pit in my stomach, unsure who was sitting across from me at the breakfast table. And now all of that was finally exposed for what it was: a lie, a manipulation, a betrayal. Michael squeezed my hand, his own expression a mixture of pride and guilt. "You were incredible through all of this," he whispered. "I don't know what I would have done without you." I nodded, though my throat was tight. "We survived it," I said quietly, "and that's what matters. We're still here. We still have our life. He can't take that away." In the weeks that followed, the story spread through our circle, friends, extended family, even neighbors. Some were shocked, others horrified, but there was also a sense of communal relief, a reassurance that the truth had been revealed and that deception had been defeated. People started asking questions about Daniel, how he had done it, and more importantly, how they could protect themselves from someone so manipulative. I remember one friend, Sarah, hugging me tightly and saying, "I can't believe someone could do that. You're so brave for facing it." And for the first time since discovering Daniel, I allowed myself to feel proud, not for exposing him, but for surviving the ordeal, for keeping my dignity intact, and for protecting my family. Michael and I slowly returned to our routines. The house began to feel like home again. The smell of burnt toast in the mornings, the soft hum of the washing machine, the clatter of pots in the kitchen. Ordinary life, once taken for granted, now felt like a victory. But the experience left its marks. I was more cautious, more aware of the signs of manipulation. I learned to trust my instincts, to pay attention to subtle changes, and to speak up before doubts became fears. And Michael, he became more transparent, more communicative. The bond between us deepened, strengthened not just by love, but by shared trauma and recovery. One afternoon, I found myself in the garden, pulling weeds while Michael worked on fixing the fence. The sunlight glinted off the flowers, the air smelled faintly of earth and rain, and I felt a sense of calm I hadn't known in months. "Do you ever think about him?" Michael asked, his voice quiet, almost hesitant. "Daniel?" I asked, wiping sweat from my brow. "Yes," he said, glancing at the ground. "Does it ever haunt you?" I paused, thinking carefully. "Sometimes," I admitted, "but not in the same way. It's more like a lesson etched in my memory. I've learned what to look for, how to protect myself and our life. It's a scar, yes, but one that reminds me how strong we are." He nodded, and I could see a flicker of relief in his eyes. We didn't speak of Daniel often after that, not because we were trying to forget, but because we had reclaimed our lives. The shadows he cast no longer controlled our days. There was one final, unexpected consequence that made me realize just how far Daniel had overstepped. Some mutual friends had begun avoiding him entirely, suspicious of his intentions, while others expressed gratitude that we had exposed him before he could harm anyone else. It was a strange sense of justice, seeing the social consequences match the deception he had perpetrated. One evening, as we sat on the porch with cups of tea, I reflected on everything that had happened. The fear, the confusion, the betrayal, it all felt like a lifetime ago. And yet it had left me stronger, more vigilant, and more appreciative of the life I had. Michael reached over and took my hand, and for the first time in months, I felt a true sense of peace. "I never thought something like this could happen to us," I said softly, watching the sunset paint the sky in soft shades of pink and gold. "Neither did I," Michael admitted, "but we made it through, together." "Yes," I whispered, squeezing his hand. "Together." And in that moment, I realized the most important lesson I had learned. Betrayal can come in the most familiar of forms, even wearing the face of the person you love. But resilience, clarity, and courage can reclaim what's been taken. You can survive deceit, you can rebuild, and you can find peace again, sometimes in the quiet moments, the ordinary routines, and the simple reaffirmation of love and trust. Life didn't go back to exactly how it had been before Daniel appeared. It couldn't, but in its own quiet, beautiful way, it became richer. I could laugh freely again, embrace my family without fear, and look toward the future without the shadow of manipulation hanging over me. I had faced a lie so intimate, so invasive, that it shook me to my core. But I had also learned that the truth, when met with courage, can heal even the deepest wounds. And as the wind rustled through the garden, carrying the scent of jasmine and fresh earth, I finally felt it, the freedom of a life reclaimed. In the weeks after Daniel's exposure, life began to settle into a rhythm I hadn't realized I'd missed so dearly. The quiet mornings, the smell of fresh coffee brewing, the soft chatter of Michael and I over breakfast, these were no longer background noise to fear and suspicion. They were signals of stability, reminders that our lives had been reclaimed. I found myself paying attention to small details again. The way sunlight filtered through the curtains in the living room, the hum of our neighbor mowing their lawn, the subtle laughter of children playing outside. Ordinary moments that had once felt mundane now carried weight, a testimony to the fragility and resilience of life. Therapy became a part of my routine. I realized that the emotional wounds left by Daniel weren't something to ignore. They needed attention, processing, and understanding. Speaking to a professional allowed me to untangle the fear from the betrayal, the anger from the relief, and helped me recognize that what had happened was not my fault. I had loved someone, trusted someone, and the deception was on them, not me. Michael and I also started to talk more openly about the past, not just the deception, but the subtle ways it had affected our marriage. He admitted moments of guilt, times he wondered if he could have noticed something earlier or if he should have warned me. I reassured him gently. Daniel was clever, manipulative, and calculated. Even the most perceptive person could have been fooled. Family gatherings gradually returned to normal. My parents, initially shocked and wary, now approached life with a renewed appreciation for honesty and presence. They too had learned a lesson in vigilance, but also in grace, understanding that love and family can survive deception when met with courage. One particular day stands out. Michael and I were in the kitchen preparing dinner together. I was chopping vegetables while he stirred a sauce, and the air was filled with the rich aroma of garlic and onions. It was such an ordinary evening, yet I felt a profound gratitude. I realized that healing wasn't about erasing what had happened. It was about reclaiming joy and trust in the life that remained. I never thought I'd feel normal again, I said quietly, watching him sprinkle herbs into the sauce. You will, Michael said, glancing at me with a soft smile. You'll just take time. And look at you, you're stronger than ever. I laughed, a soft, genuine laugh that felt foreign and yet comforting. Stronger, yes, and more suspicious, I teased. He chuckled, and it felt like the first time in months that laughter hadn't carried an edge of fear or unease. We also began focusing on protecting our future. Passwords were changed, finances secured, and important documents organized. I took note of how easily someone could slip into our lives and manipulate them, and I refused to allow that vulnerability again. It wasn't paranoia, it was preparation, and with Michael by my side, I felt capable of handling whatever life might throw at us next. Over time, the pain of betrayal softened. I found joy in small things again, walking in the garden, reading a book on the porch, or having a quiet conversation with Michael late at night. The shadows Daniel had cast no longer dictated my days. Instead, they served as reminders of resilience, courage, and the power of truth. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and lavender, I sat alone on the porch, reflecting. I thought about the fear, the confusion, the heartbreak, and then about the triumph of clarity, the relief of justice, and the warmth of love restored. I realized that healing wasn't a single moment, but a series of small steps, reclaiming routines, sharing honest conversations, and learning to trust again. Each step forward was a testament to strength, to patience, and to the unwavering desire to protect one's life and family. And the most important lesson? Life is unpredictable. People may betray, deceive, and manipulate, but those who remain grounded in truth, courage, and compassion can reclaim what's been taken. I had faced a deception so deep that it shook me to my core, yet I emerged wiser, stronger, and more appreciative of the life I had built. Michael joined me on the porch, a cup of tea in hand, and we watched the twilight settle over the garden. I felt a quiet peace I hadn't known in months, a comfort in knowing that love, true love, could survive even the most invasive betrayal. "We made it through," I whispered. "Yes," he said, wrapping his arm around me. I leaned into him, inhaling the familiar scent of his cologne, the warmth of his presence, and the reassurance of shared resilience. The journey had been harrowing, but it had taught me something invaluable. Even in the face of deceit, fear, and betrayal, one can reclaim dignity, rebuild trust, and find peace. The story of Daniel would always be a part of me, a reminder of the shadows that can exist in the most familiar places. But it no longer held power over me. I had taken back my life, piece by piece, and with that reclamation came freedom, hope, and the quiet joy of moving forward without fear. And so life continued. Ordinary days, quiet evenings, shared laughter, and simple routines became the markers of recovery. Each day was a testament to resilience, to courage, and to the enduring strength of truth. As I sit here now, the sun setting over our little garden, I find myself reflecting on everything that happened, the fear, the betrayal, the discovery of Daniel pretending to be Michael, and the long, exhausting path to reclaiming our lives. There were nights I thought I might never feel safe again, nights where the very walls of our home felt foreign, as though a stranger had been living inside them alongside me. But in those dark moments, I learned something invaluable. The human heart is resilient. It bends, it breaks, and it aches. But it can also mend, grow stronger, and learn to trust again. I realized that no deception, no matter how clever or invasive, can truly destroy what is built on honesty, love, and courage. I also learned the importance of paying attention to intuition, the little things we sometimes dismiss, hesitations, inconsistencies, gut feelings. They're often more accurate than we think. I had brushed off those early signs, thinking I was imagining things, until the truth revealed itself in the most shocking way. It was a painful lesson, but one that ultimately saved me from losing everything. Michael and I now live with a renewed sense of closeness. We talk openly, we share our fears and joys, and we protect our space with care and vigilance. Ordinary moments, coffee in the morning, cooking dinner together, watching the sunset, have taken on a new significance. They are markers of trust regained and life reclaimed. I think often about Daniel. I don't wish him harm, but I hope he has learned something from the consequences of his choices. The law and social consequences caught up with him, yes, but the deeper lesson is this. Pretending to be someone else may give you power for a moment, but it can never create the genuine love, trust, or belonging that comes from living honestly. To anyone listening to this story, I want you to know something very clearly. Your instincts matter. Protect your space, your trust, and the people you love. But also remember that healing is possible, even after profound betrayal. Life may not return exactly to the way it was, and that's okay. There's beauty in rebuilding, in learning, and in finding a new normal that is stronger and wiser than before. And finally, I want to leave you with a question. one I've asked myself countless times over these past months. If someone you trusted completely turned out to be a stranger wearing a familiar face, what would you do to reclaim your life? Think about that, reflect, and remember, courage isn't always loud or dramatic. It can be quiet, deliberate, and steady. It can be in the small acts, checking your accounts, trusting your gut, speaking your truth, or reclaiming ordinary moments that bring joy. If my story has touched you, or if you face something similar and want to share your own journey, I'd love for you to comment below. Your voice matters, and your experience may help someone else feel less alone. And if you want to hear more stories like mine, stories of betrayal, resilience, and redemption, please subscribe and join me on this journey. Because no matter what shadows come into our lives, there is always a way back to the light. There is always a way to reclaim your story, your trust, and your peace.